morning. This lecture video is going to look at blood microscopy. So how do we do or make a blood smear? And then once we make that smear on the slide and we look at it under a microscope, how can you tell the different types of cells that make up the blood? So when we talk about a blood smear, basically what that means is they take a drop of blood from a sample, so typically from a human, and then they're going to basically smear that blood across the length of the slide. So really what we're trying to do is we're trying to spread out all of the different types of blood cells that are going to be in that blood sample by smearing it all the way along across the slide, and then it will dry out and we can look at it under the microscope. When we look at a blood smear under a microscope, we are looking for a couple different types of things. We're looking at the types of cells that are present. We're looking at the number of those cells in comparison to the other types of cells that will also be in there. And then we're also kind of looking at overall shape and sizes of the cells. So here's kind of an example of the first cell in this slide. What I want to kind of just focus on is the red blood cells, so the RBCs. So you can kind of see that obviously the red blood cells are the most abundant of the cells, and they're the smallest of the cells. So all of these are white blood cells, these big purple big ones, but all of these red pink ones with the concave center, these are the red blood cells. And you can see that our red blood cells are round shaped and that they do have this concave center in the inside, which gives the red blood cell some flexibility. Remember, it's got to be able to make its way through all of the blood vessels, so it needs to kind of be able to squish itself and condense and conform to squeeze through. And these would be pretty normal looking red blood cells. Now, one of the things that they might look for, depending on the symptoms the patient might have, is the shape of these red blood cells. So in a disorder like sickle cell anemia, what happens is that the blood cells, the red blood cells, become a different shape. They're shaped like a sickle here. And so just by looking at those red blood cell shapes and seeing if there are any of these sickles shaped red blood cells, these abnormally shaped blood cells, a doctor would be able to, or a lab tech would be able to diagnose this particular disorder. Now, if you think about the fact that these blood cells need to travel through our blood vessels, veins, arteries, capillaries, you can see why this sickle-shaped, this abnormally shaped red blood cell would be a problem, because look at the edges. So because they're not smooth and round and cushy like the normal red blood cell is, these can, as they're traveling through the bloodstream, rip through those blood vessels and cause internal bleeding, which is one of the symptoms of somebody who has sickle cell anemia. They bleed very easily because they have these sharper, abnormally shaped red blood cells going through and tearing their blood vessels. So those are kind of the red blood cells. Now, if we go to the white blood cells, so when we look at white blood cells, we're really kind of focusing on what white blood cells are present, if they're present in the right amount, and if there is one that is not present in a normal amount, either too many or too few, or maybe abnormally shaped, then that can give us a clue as to what might be happening to the patient. We put white blood cells into two categories, granulocytes and agranulocytes, and the difference is, if you kind of look here, granulocytes have these dark granules, kind of these spots or these grains in them, in the cytoplasm, and agranulocytes do not. So granulocytes will include your neutrophil, your eosinophil, and your basophils, and then the agranulocytes will include your monocytes and your lymphocytes. So let's start with the granulocytes. So we'll start with the neutrophil. You can tell a neutrophil because it's going to have several different lobes, the nucleus. So this dark part is the nucleus, and here's the cytoplasm. So you can see the granules, and the nucleus has all these different lobes in it. So that's kind of the characteristic of a neutrophil. Their job is to kill and digest bacteria and fungi. They're the most numerous type of white blood cell, and they are your first line of defense when infection strikes. So moving on to the eosinophils, these are going to also be multi-lobed nucleus. So you can see here that the nucleus has got several different lobes to it. You can kind of tell an eosinophil from a neutrophil because the granulocytes are a lot darker, and their job is to attack and kill parasites, cancer cells, and then they also play a role in allergic responses. So multi-lobed like a neutrophil, but you can really see the dark pink granules in a eosinophil. And then a basophil is going to be, you can see the granules. The granules are actually really dark purple, so you can almost can't even tell the difference between the granules and the nucleus. So it looks like this really dark, deep purple grains everywhere. It's hard to distinguish between them. Basophils are really small cells, and basically their job is to sound an alarm when an infectious agent invades the blood. So they're kind of like like a tornado siren, sort of. They secrete chemicals like histamines as markers of allergic diseases, and that helps control the body's immune response. So they're kind of going to be the, like I said, the siren or the all call, like, hey, there's something in here that's foreign that we need to set into motion our immune response to defeat it. Going to the agranulocytes, so again, the agranulocytes, you will not have those grains in there. So if you look at a lymphocyte, one of the characteristics of lymphocytes is they're smaller. They're about the same size as a red blood cell, whereas these ones are significantly bigger than a red blood cell. But lymphocytes are about the same size, so that's one way you can identify them. Their job is to create antibodies to fight against bacteria, viruses, and then other potentially harmful invaders. They are, like I said, about the same size as a red blood cell and a very, very dark nucleus. So you see just a tiny halo here of cytoplasm. And then last is the monocyte. So the monocyte is going to look like a large kidney bean. The nucleus will, and again, you can see then the cytoplasm will be on the, inside of that kidney bean, sort of. The function of monocytes is to help break down bacteria. These cells live the longest of all of the white blood cells, so they can help fight infections for a longer period of time. So again, looking at these different characteristics, when you look at a blood smear, you should be able to get a general idea of overall health by comparing, first of all, are there more eosinophils than there should be? Are there fewer? Same with lymphocytes. Are there more lymphocytes than there should be? Are there fewer? And then looking at, the shape of some of these cells, the red blood cells and the white blood cells can also tell you information about your health. So white blood cell counts, when you get a complete blood count, a CBC, oftentimes they'll do a differential count, and in a differential count, they'll actually differentiate between how many or what percentage of the blood or what percentage of the blood cells are each of these individual cells. So that will help, again, give us a hint. Is it a fungus infection that's going on, a bacterial infection, a viral infection, those types of things based on whether or not there is more of a certain type of white blood cell. Any questions? Feel free to holler.